Hello YouTube, this is the explanation video for the fourth memory from Gascoignes' memories. In haste post-haste, when first my wandering mind beheld the glittering court, with gazing eye, such deep delights I seemed therein to find, as might beguile a graver guest than I. So here we have 7 sonnets. Each sonnet begins with the last line of the previous sonnet, and as you might expect with all of these poems that are, as I mentioned previously, part of a coterie tradition and therefore related to the court. In these first lines here, we have a direct reference to the court. We also have, in all of these poems, but in this one and the last one especially, a particular focus on autobiographical elements for Gascoigne. So he's talking here, presumably, about his own experience with the court, when he first, with his wandering mind, beheld the glittering court, with gazing eye, such deep delights I seemed therein to find, as might beguile a graver guest than I. So he was quite taken by the glittering nature of court. The stately pomp of princes and their peers did seem to swim in floods of Eton gold. The wanton world of young, delightful years was not unlike a heaven for to behold. Again, quite delightful, the court, as if swimming in floods of beaten gold. And the court culture was also one of excess in other ways. The wanton world of young, delightful years was a part of that. It was not unlike a heaven for to behold. It was mesmerizing. Wherein did swarm for every saint a dame, so fair of hue, so fresh of their attire, as might excel Dame Cynthia for fame, or conquer Cupid with his own desire. So, again, it's a place of great splendor. Every man seemed to have a woman who was beautiful and fresh in her attire, more beautiful than Cynthia, or conquer Cupid with his own desire, he says. So even Cupid could be overcome by the beauty of the women at court. These and such like were baits that blazed still before mine eye to feed my greedy will. So he admits right at the beginning here that he was greedy in his youth when first encountering the court, and drawn in to the court and its ways by that greed. Before mine eyes to feed my greedy will, 'gan muster eke mine old acquainted mates, who helps the dish of vain delight to fill my empty mouth with dainty delicates. So he's not alone at court. He also has his old mates along with him, his old friends, who help to fill his empty mouth with dainty delicates. So they initiate him into these excesses of the court. And foolish boldness took a whip in hand to lash my life into the trustless trace, till all in haste I leapt aloof from land and hoisted up soil to catch a courtly grace. So he was so overcome by these excesses of court, and he wanted so much to receive everything the court had to offer, that his boldness took up the whip to lash him into the trustless trace, that path that led him to seek notoriety outside of England. So he leapt aloof from land and hoisted up soil to catch a courtly grace. So his travels in an attempt to gain courtly grace or courtly favor. Each lingering day did seem a world of woe, till in that hapless haven my head was brought. Waves of vain hope so tossed me to and fro, and deep despair to drown my dreadful thought. Each hour a day, each day a year did seem, and every year a world my will did deem. So this was not a good time in his life. He was trying so desperately to achieve the glittering things the court had presented to his eyes in his younger days, but he was not having success. And as a result, each lingering day did seem a world of woe, and he was tossed by the feelings of failure that resulted from his inability to achieve the success he had hoped for. And every year a world my will did deem, till lo at last to court now I am come, a seemly swain that might that place beseem, a gladsome guest, embraced of all and some. So he's back at court at this point in the narrative that's being played out through these sonnets. He's a seemly swain, so he looks good. He seems to have had some success. A seemly swain that might the place beseem or become, a gladsome guest embraced of all and some. So he's somehow made himself into someone that he thinks is worthy of being embraced by all and some at court. Not there content with common dignity, my wandering eye in haste, yea post haste, beheld the blazing badge of bravery, for want whereof I thought myself disgraced. So he's at court, and he has some sort of seemliness, he's achieved some sort of notoriety, but not content with common dignity, he sees the badge of bravery, and now he wants that too, and he thinks even that he is disgraced if he doesn't have it. Then peevish pride puff up my swelling heart, to further forth so hot an enterprise, and comely cost began to play his part, in praising patterns of mine own devise. Thus all was good that might be got in haste, prink me up and make me higher placed. And so he again has another scheme as a result of his swelling heart through peevish pride to send him forth on another hot enterprise so that he could gain additional altitude, so to speak, at court, to prink him up, to push him up, to set him up in a higher place. To prink me up and make me higher placed, all came too late that tarried any time. Pills of provision pleased not my taste, they made my heels too heavy for to climb. Methought it best that boughs of boisterous oak should first be shed to make my feathers gay, till at the last a deadly dinting stroke brought down the bulk with edge tooths of decay. Now this is interesting. It seems like what he's saying here is he didn't want to waste time. All came too late to tarry any time. Pills of provision pleased not my taste. So he didn't really want to prepare very well. He didn't want to take the time to prepare. And he wanted to get the money necessary in order to get this new endeavor underway very quickly. And so, it seems, when he says, "Methought it best that boughs of boisterous oak should first be shed to make my feathers gay," it seems like what he's saying there is that the forests on his property were deforested in order to give him money quickly so that he could make his feathers gay, so that he could buy things that, in contrast to the provisions that he was not pleased by, these feathers, these useless things, to feed his pride. And it says, "Till at the last a deadly dinting stroke brought down the bulk with edge tooth of decay." So this plan to deforest his property turns out not to have been a very good plan. And the whole plan, like the oaks that were brought down to feed his pride, was brought down with decay. Of every farm I then let fly a lease, to feed the purse that paid for peevishness, till rent and all were fallen in such disease as scarce could serve to maintain cleanliness. So he rented out all of his holdings to try to get more money once the money from deforesting his properties was not enough, but everything fell apart and there wasn't even enough left to maintain cleanliness. They bought the body fine, fern, lease, and land, and all were too little for the merchant's hand. So he ended up squandering what he had because of haste, and he was left with nothing. All were too little for the merchant's hand, and yet my bravery bigger than his book. So again, he's still focused on this, wants this acknowledgement for bravery, and he's willing to do anything, ruin himself to get it. But when this hot account was coldly scanned, I thought high time about me for to look. With heavy cheer I cast my head aback to see the fountain of my furious race, compared my loss, my living, and my lack in equal balance with my jolly grace. So he finally looks around and he sees, after having the fountain of his furious race, so the sort of the result of this furious dash, this mad dash to get what he wanted, he compared his loss, his living, and his lack in equal balance with his jolly grace. Though he's finally taking stock of what happened, what he did to himself, and saw experiences grating on the ground like lumps of lead to press my purse full oft, when light reward and recompense were found, fleeting like feathers in the wind aloft. So finally he stops to look around himself, and he finds he has ruined himself, and there's either lumps of lead or fleeting feathers. We get, again, contrast in these two images, extremes, the very heavy and the very light, to represent the things that are weighing him down and the things that he thought were substantial that are just blowing away. These thus compared, I left the court at large. For why? The gains does seldom quit charge. So he realized he had ruined himself, and he decides to leave the court. Why does he decide to leave the court? Because the gains seldom quit the charge. In other words, it's not worth it. He realized it's not worth it. For why? The gains does seldom quit the charge. And so say I, by proof too dearly bought. My haste made west, my brave and brain-sick barge did float too fast to catch a thing of naught. So, by proof too dearly bought, he realizes it's not worth it. But, in his haste, his brave and brain-sick barge did float too fast to catch a thing of naught. So, he is again too hasty. With leisure measure mean and many more, I mought have kept a chair of quiet state. But hasty heads cannot be settled so, till crooked fortune gives a crabbed or perverse mate. So he's saying, if I had just slowed down a little bit, if I had just left well enough alone, if I had just been satisfied with what I had, then I wouldn't have ended up where I was. I could have had a quiet chair of state. I could have had some boring position that doesn't get praised for bravery, but it would have been enough till crooked fortune gave a crabbed mate. So he was unfortunate. Again, fortune plays in here. Fortune has been mentioned several times before, and in the larger discussion I'll talk about that. But fortune sends him unfortunate circumstances. As busy brains must beat on tickle toys, as rash inventions breeds a raw devise, so sudden falls do hinder hasty joys, and as swift baits do fleetest fish entice. So again, in a state of excess, busy brains beating on tickle toys, a toy by definition is something insubstantial, something simply to lull away the time, to waste time, essentially. As rash invention breeds a raw devise, rash invention, being hasty thinking, breeds a incomplete thought, and sudden falls do hinder hasty joys, sudden happenstances that one doesn't expect. So haste makes waste, and therefore now I say, no haste but good where wisdom makes the way. So he comes to the conclusion, through all of these examples of how hastiness leads to problems, including autobiographical information about how haste leads to nothing good. He says the only kind of haste that's good is one that is led by wisdom. No haste but good where wisdom makes the way. No haste but good where wisdom makes the way. For proof whereof behold the simple snail, who sees the soldier's carcass cast away with hot assault the castle to assail. By line and leisure climbs the lofty wall and wins the turret's top more cunningly than doughty Dick, who lost his life and all with hoisting up his head too hastily. So the snail, this small, insignificant creature, manages to get to the top of the castle wall slowly, but surely and safely. Whereas the man, in his quest for bravery, perhaps mirroring what Gascoigne was talking about earlier in his hasty quest for bravery, pokes his head up too fast and gets it, well, at least hit. He lost his life and all with hoisting up his head too hastily. The swiftest dog brings forth the blindest whelps. This is kind of like a saying of the time, that just because the animal itself is swift doesn't mean its offspring will be good, or in fact that as a result of it being swift, the offspring would be bad. The hottest fevers, coldest cramps ensue. Again, we're talking about extremes here. Very interesting. Hot and cold, swift and blind. Blind is not exactly an opposite of swift, but in a way it is when you think about it. The nakedest need hath over latest helps. With Neville, then, I find this proverb true, that haste makes waste, and therefore still I say, no haste but good where wisdom makes the way. Again, he is bringing it back to haste and excess. Neville here is a reference to the individual Alexander Neville, who gave him the theme on which this poem is based. So a lot of interesting things in here that will certainly come up again when we talk about the whole collection of memories. And again, there's a play on the extremes here. There's also less of an emphasis on virtue here, more of an emphasis on vice, actually, and how haste is a vice, how greed is a vice, how folly is a vice, and how society, or at least the society of court, encourages vice in individuals who seek to become a part of it. Sounds very similar to modern politics and political life, don't you think? A very interesting parallel. It's almost like humans are humans no matter when and where they are, and therefore they do the same things and have the same problems. Interesting, isn't it? Well, anyway, that's all for this one. I hope you're enjoying these, and I'll see you around.